not necessarily the news to The Office. Whenever there is a British comedy to be adapted, you're the guy to go to, right? I'd like just to know which one is your favorite British comedy of all time besides Monty Python?
Besides Monty Python, well, probably The Office. Yeah, it's such a great show. Even if I hadn't gotten the chance to adapt it, I just would have been a fan from watching it. I love Fawlty Towers. I'm watching the show Sherlock now, which is very good. There's a ton of shows. Kind of blanking on them now, but but Downton Abbey, big fan. You know, we get them on the public television.
Yeah. PBS,
yeah.
And what's the key to great adaptation?
Oh wow.
In a nutshell.
For me, it takes me a long time to thoroughly understand what I'm adapting. And I kind of look at it like a clock, and you take the top off and you get in there and you figure out all the gears and try and really understand why everything has been put in the clock by the person who first made it. And then you can recreate it, but then there's a second step, which is to change it for the country that you're in. And for me, I didn't change it the first season. I didn't change it till the second season. So I wasn't quick enough on the uptake there. But I like to have some kind of feedback with seeing it on its feet. And since you don't get the opportunity to do months of rehearsals, you only get about a week of rehearsals. So often you're making changes when it's already on the air. But you know, kind of figure it out. You got to know your own nation.
You've got the trifecta of comedy in network TV. You have sketch comedy. You've worked in half-hour shows, single or multi-camera, and also you've done animation. Haven't you been tempted to do a cable show to push the comedy a little bit further, or do you consider yourself a network writer?
Well, the thing I'm writing now is probably for cable, but cable's got such a short season in the U.S. that, you know, previously I had so much that I wanted to do, and I liked having 28 episodes to do for a season of The Office. It was a lot of work, but it was fun, and you know, there's a whole staff. But I could see doing shows for cable. I like also to be part of the conversation. Do you know what I mean? And cable is now a very big part of the conversation. Everyone's only talking about cable TV shows, so it seems more attractive.
Is sketch comedy something that young writers in the US do while they dream of doing fiction or go on to do fiction?
I think some people stick with sketch comedy. To me, it's like mathematics. You know, they say that the great mathematicians do their best work when they're in their 20s. And I think sketch comedy is hard. It's better for the people when they're in their 20s. I enjoyed it when I was doing it, but it's exhausting to think about going back to that. So I think I'll stick in fiction and character comedy.
And do you consider yourself a pioneer of the huge spectrum that we have now of adult animation? Because you've got several shows and very, very important shows such as The Simpsons, where you worked in, and King of the Hill, which you created. Do you consider yourself some kind of a pioneer of animation, adult animation?
I wouldn't say a pioneer because it was, you know, all being done before I got there, but I will say that I think what we did with King of the Hill is as far that anyone has pushed animation towards live action, probably, in the writing and the tone. I don't know of a lot of shows that are more realistic than that. Whether that was a good thing or not, I don't know, but it's out there as maybe a marker And I don't think there'll be a lot of shows that are more real than that. Although when you look at comic books, there's a wonderful tradition of graphic novels and autobiographical graphic novels that I find to be very interesting and inspiring. And I don't think they have enormous readership, but I feel like there could be a ton of animated shows that had that spirit.
And regarding new scenarios to create, could you recommend a web series or a content just made for the internet?
You want me to recommend a web series to watch?
Yes.
Yeah? Well, I really like one called High Maintenance. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's set in New York, and it's like short stories that are connected by the fact that a pot dealer bicycles around and delivers pot at some point in the story to somebody in the story. And they have about 15 of them. I think it's great.
We know that, because he's said so many times, Ricky Gervais was delighted when The Office went on syndication, and he started, in his own words, I'm quoting, make tons of money for doing nothing. How was the adapting The Office at the beginning? What was his implication, his involvement, and how did that work out?
Mm-hmm. Well, both creators of The Office, Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, I met with them in London before doing the show, and they were both very, very positive and encouraging of everything that I wanted to do. And they didn't do a lot of in-person work on the show, but they had already created the template, and whenever I was curious, I would go back and watch their episode and go, oh, well, I guess that's how they did it. And I had a few questions on how they were able to achieve what they did, which they answered and set me straight. So it was good. It was like I always had them, if I wanted to, call them or whatever. But the biggest challenge for our version of the show was getting further away from the British version. And I was probably too respectful in the beginning of the British version, and they kept saying, come on, make your own thing. And it took me a while to figure that out.
You, along with Larry David, wrote an episode of Seinfeld. How did you get that gig?
Well, that was interesting. My agent, who is Ari Emanuel, who is the agent on Entourage that they based that character on, although he doesn't really behave like that. But he called me up and said, I've got you to talk to Larry David on the phone for 10 minutes, and you can pitch him anything you want. And I came up with a whole bunch of ideas. The one that I sold to him was based on a story that had happened to my father in New York when I was growing up. And he used to have to repark his car every other day because of the street regulations. And it would take him an hour driving around looking for a parking space. And he finally found one day, and he started to back into it. And the guy behind him started to front into it. And neither of them would budge. And they wouldn't get out of the space. And they stayed there for hours. And my dad saw a friend of his walking by, and he yelled, call my wife, get her to bring me dinner. And they were basically stuck there for all night long. So I pitched that to Larry David, and he thought it was a great New York story. And I ended up writing a version, and then he also rewrote it.
Was that only that one time, was it?
I was selling another one. I had another one that I was working on for him, but I got hired on The Simpsons, so I gave it up.
Tough decision.
Yeah.
And did you have the feeling that you were writing, because it was the third season and it was not like Seinfeld, but did you have the feeling that you were writing for something to be
I
made?
did. I loved it from the moment, from season 1. I was like, this is the best show. And I'm actually happier to be on the third season. I think that was maybe the best season. I loved the time that I was on.
You've had several pilots that haven't been picked. the process of writing.
Yes.
The process of writing and producing a pilot, it's hard enough for the situation in which you don't get picked. Which one of those had been the worst?
The one that most deserved to be picked, or the one that most deserved to not be picked? Both. Well, you know, they're all projects that you worked on a long time, and there was one that I did that was another British adaptation of a show called Friday Night Dinner, and the cast was so good on that. I had Tony Shalhoub and Allison Janney as the stars, and these two very funny young guys as the children, and I think that could have turned into something good.
And well, Parks and Recreation started with a low profile and went on to be beloved by the critics. And how did you pitch that idea to NBC?
Well, that was completely unlike any other experience because at the time The Office was on the air, and they came to me and they said, we want another show. And originally they talked about a spin-off, and I took one of the best writers on The Office, Mike Schur, and we came up with a whole bunch of ideas. And the one that we had agreed upon was to do a mockumentary, but about government, and we pitched it to Amy Poehler, and as soon as she wanted to do it, we wrote it right to her specifications, and we're very excited. And again, we went like straight into a series without a pilot, and so the first 5 or 6 episodes we had to learn everything about what was working, what wasn't working, and you know, I think we found our show by episode 7 probably, and but you have to overcome the first when you air the first batch of cookies and it's a little burnt on the bottom. A lot of times the critics go, well, the cookies aren't so good. The second batch might be great, but it takes a while for them to come back and want to taste your cookies again.
It does, really does.
Yeah.
And, you were talking about Amy Poehler. She's been awarded with the Golden Globe this year.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's great for the show as well. She's also involved in the process of writing. How is it to have this star, which is now she's also a huge star, the star, the producer, and also the writer in the show, which is not, and she's not the creator of the show. How is it to get the star in the show involved in the writing process?
Well, it's great. We encourage it. It's something that I did on The Office with Steve Carell. I think that the more people can take different roles in the production, the more it becomes like a handmade and not a factory-made product, and the more it's like something that you make in your house, kind of. It has a nice feeling to it, and they understand. When she directs the show, she realizes a lot of things that the directors have been maybe trying to tell her for a while, and now she really walks in their shoes and realizes something. And when she writes it, she then later realizes, God, it's kind of hard to write, and she has great respect for the writing staff. And sometimes the writers can go on stage and act in small parts. And I think that's great too, because they see how hard that is. And it's just a way to make everybody respect each other more. I can see in some circumstances that it could be a negative, but the way that it has worked out for us has been very positive.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Sure. My pleasure. Thank you.